Okay, we are live.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'd like to call the Friday, March 19th Special District Advisory Committee meeting to order. And would like to ask that we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and that should show up on your screen momentarily. Ready?
Yeah.
Begin.
Yeah.
I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, justice for all. Okay. Could we please have the roll call by the secretary?
Kim Thorner,
Present.
Jack Beebe,
Present.
Paul Bushy,
Here.
Fred Cox,
Present.
James Gordon, absent. Tom Kennedy,
I'm here.
I think James was muted.
James is there.
okay. Cheryl Landrum, is absent. Al Lau,
Here.
Hector Martinez, is absent. Marty Miller, is absent. Mark Roback,
He was here a second ago.
He was just on the line, but I don't see him right now.
Joel Scalzitti, absent. Mike Sims,
Here?
Joel is present.
okay.
Thank you.
Oliver Smith,
Here.
and Bob Thomas. And there is a quorum.
Oh, good. All right, good to hear. All right, with that, we're going to move on to the executive officer report.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, this is John Van Dorn. I wasn't called for the roll, but I am here.
Okay,
I will note that.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair Thorner, and good morning, advisory committee members on this hopefully nice start to the weekend. And so today's agenda is what you see it before you. I know that the main item probably of discussion is 5B, but that said, we are going to also talk about the LAFCO budget and work plan for the next year. Those are our two main items. Robert's going to cover our active proposals on file. And then last but not least, if we have time, and I am sensitive to this, Chair, so at your discretion, if we go long, perhaps we'll move this to another day. But I did want to check in on our website as we start to look at doing a bit of a refinement and getting some input. That all said, for the record, I want to note that we are live streaming today's meeting on YouTube, and the committee is able to take public comment. We have two mechanisms for that. In fact, there's a number of people already on your screen who have pre-registered to speak. Again, that's for 5B. But then also, Chair, we are able to take live email comments from the public. The instructions on how to do that are both on the agenda as well as on our home website. And so as we go through each item, at your discretion, Chair, we can check in with Erica. She's manning our inbox, and she can advise if we have any comments. If we do, then we'll apply the same normal rules of 3 minutes, and Erica can read the email in that time frame. So other than that, I'm glad that we're getting our quarterly meeting going. So thank you.
Thank you. Should I check in with Erica now to see if we've had any comments?
Yes.
Erica, could you advise if we have any general comments outside of the speakers that would like to speak on 5B?
I have no registered speakers as of yet.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, with that, why don't we move on to item number 4, which is the consent calendar. I would entertain a motion on consent.
So
I'll
moved.
motion to approve. This is Paul.
I got
Second.
Paul first and Kennedy second. Is that correct? Was she first, Kennedy second? Yes. Okay,
Correct.
any discussion on consent or wish to pull any item? Okay, with that, all those in favor of approving the consent, say aye.
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 Do we need a roll
Aye.
call vote? or-
Technically we
Aye.
do, don't we? Yeah, you're right, TK. All right, then we need to do a roll call vote on this. Sorry, guys.
Kim Thorner,
Yes.
Jack Beebe,
Yes.
Paul Bushy,
Yes.
Fred Cox,
Yes.
James Gordon,
Yes.
Tom Kennedy,
Yes.
Ms. Cheryl Landrum, Al Lau,
Yes.
Hector Martinez,
Yes.
is Marty Miller in? No, absent. Mark Roback, no, absent. Joel Scalzitti,
Yes.
Mike Sims, no response. Oliver Smith,
Yes.
and John Van Dorn.
Mr. Van Dorn's feed appears to be frozen.
Ten in favor, the motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we are now on to the business items, and item 5A is review of the draft work plan and budget for 21-22. And our executive officer is going to talk on this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to ask for a quick pause and see if I've gotten a couple of text messages that there are members, Cheryl Landrum being one, and I think Hector was having trouble getting onto the Zoom address. Is there anything we can do on our end? I know Cheryl is having trouble right now. And Hector, I did see Hector for a second. Oh, there he is.
Yes.
So with that comment said, maybe if you could just double check whatever we can double check. I'll go ahead with item 5A, Chair, and it is the committee's opportunity to take in what at least the commission in a tentative sense has planned for the upcoming fiscal year, both in terms of a work plan, how we choose to direct our resources, and then separately, of course, how we fund those resources through a draft budget. And so what you have in your packet is what was presented to the commission a few weeks back with some adjustments made at the dais, okay, and has been tentatively approved. And right now we are in a 45-day public comment period. And so what I would like the committee to do starting today, and then as individual members and your agencies themselves, is to consider any feedback you like to provide before staff finalizes these documents and goes to our commission for final adoption on May, I think May 3rd. And then like on May 4th, we'll go ahead and send out those invoices. But as for the work plan, which is attachment 1 to the staff report, you'll see 30 projects that the commission has identified being worthy of our time next year. It's highlighted by a top 10, right? Those are the projects that the commission is saying right now they most certainly want to prioritize over the 21-22 fiscal year. Some of those projects will look familiar. We're still muddling a bit in the North County with our projects involving Fallbrook and Rainbow. Those certainly remain on our to-do list. But there are also a couple of additions that we've added. One is we had a reprieve last year when we realized our lease wasn't actually going to expire in year 2020. So we were able to punt the ball, but our lease is definitely ending in 21, in August of 21. So finding a long-term spot for LAFCO, whether it's being able to renegotiate a lease here at the county or perhaps even going outside the county and making a office purchase, a building purchase. That is of interest to the commission, at least to explore, right? The idea is we're going to be around presumably until the legislature tells us otherwise. So maybe there's some long-term cost savings with a building purchase. Other new projects that we've added, the commission is interested in expanding our outreach efforts. So proactively translating documents into Spanish as a baseline service, and then also exploring the policies and procedures on translating to other languages based on some kind of criterion. We haven't worked that part out, right? What is the threshold when we immediately translate documents or notices based on the affected territory? I'd be curious if any of the special district members here have policies on that. And then also dealing with this issue of environmental justice made the top 10. In fact, that was one of the more specific conversations that the commission had in looking at this document. Staff had put it a little further down on the to-do list. The commission moved it up to a top 10, which I think obviously signals their interest. And for the record, I see Cheryl has joined us, Ruth, at 9:44. Good morning, Cheryl. And the idea, and I do want to just spend a couple of seconds talking about environmental justice, in that LAFCO has been tasked, and I see Mark Roback has joined us too. LAFCO's been tasked with dealing with environmental justice anytime we deal with boundary proposals for at least the last 12 years. And that was added to the litany of factors that we are tasked with addressing anytime we review boundary changes. The reality is we really haven't dived into the topic too much. I don't think we're alone because this year the legislature expanded the definition in the thought process of environmental justice for LAFCO purposes. And I think that was its subtle signal to San Diego and other LAFCOs to start dealing with this topic. How we deal with it is still a variable. I just know that the commission is saying to staff, that's going to be a priority. So I'd be happy to talk about any of the other projects that you see on that work list, but let me now just transition to how we're going to fund those 30 projects. And that gets us to the draft budget you have before you. For the most part, committee, it's a status quo. It's still funding 8 full-time positions. It's still providing service levels at its current level. But there is a small overall increase of 1.3%. And that increase really is somewhat out of our hands in the sense that it's tied to our contractual cost with both pension and healthcare. We have done our best to limit the overall increase, and compliments to staff. No one got too upset when we rolled back and eliminated a pre-planned COLA. So there are no salary increases going into 21, 22. And then on the revenue side, and for our new members, LAFCO under statute is set up to be 100% funded by the funding agencies. And the county gets a certain percentage, the city of San Diego gets a certain percentage, and then The rest of the cities and the special districts all have a formalized portion of our budget. This LAFCO chooses to also budget application fees and some other items to help limit the pass through to the funding agencies. But this said, our revenues totals are also increasing by 1.3%, but the commission has made a decision to fix the amount of the total apportionments that you all get invoiced to be exactly what they were this current fiscal year. So whatever your agency was billed for 2021, that will be what you'll get a bill if the budget ultimately gets finalized in 21-22. And for those who are interested, we can certainly send a listing of what all our apportionments are, at least for last year. And those, again, presumably will be what they will be for 21-22. So that is at least the tentative game plan, both in terms of work plan items and our budget. Again, looking for feedback before I go back to the commission at our May meeting. And Chair Thorner, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Keen. Tom, I see your hand, Mr. Kennedy, is raised.
Yeah, Keen, I have a couple of questions on the work plan. First, do you have a bill in the Assembly or Senate yet for item 5? Has there been a bill sponsored on that?
Let me look at the work plan to see what number 5 is.
That's your legislative proposal for 56133.
Yes, no. So thank you, Tom. There is no bill as of today. That's hopefully something we will generate before the end of the calendar year to be then in the 2022 session. And that's something that I would imagine at the next meeting, we will check in with the committee before we proceed with an actual author to get, if not your blessing, at least a head nod going forward.
All right, so maybe they'll CalAFCO try to slip it in an omnibus bill in the summer or something like that. Also, now as I was reading CKH under the environmental justice, which of course I support the goals of this objective, and under 5668P, I suppose that's the active part of the CKH you're working on. I'm curious as if maybe in the future meeting you could give this committee some, maybe CalAFCO's done some presentations on it. Exactly how does that work when, say, some development has been approved by the county or is going through that process, and LAFCO is just being asked to change the boundary of a sewer agency or whatever to facilitate the municipal services? Because one of the concerns I have, and it's a hot topic in some circles for ongoing battles on planning efforts, but it would seem to me that that battle should be at the planning level for whatever development it is, like a county supervisors or even within a city, as opposed to being a second front within LAFCO, a second bite at the apple for opponents. But I was just curious, maybe you can give us a rundown of how that works in practice.
And so I'll start with the first comment you made about coming back to the committee with certainly a more expanded discussion before we actually, kind of create a policy and a set of procedures. That makes sense to me. So we'll do that. The baseline right now, Tom and committee members, is we really don't address environmental justice in any substantive way right now. We have a kind of a standard comment that, we have no information to suggest that there is an impact on environmental justice, therefore there's no issues. But, to be fair, we haven't explored it. It's interesting, Tom, the way you phrase that. You started off in your description of a county development saying then it goes to LAFCO for just a boundary change. I would revert that order. The boundary change is what will be, our memorialized as the biggest issue in the long term. Where the governmental boundaries and where special or services are provided. So I say that to suggest some way, somehow, we need to sink into the development phase more than we have. while being sensitive to this idea that LAFCOs statutorily are prohibited to directly influence land use decisions. Indirectly, we do it all the time, and we enjoy doing it. But we've got to be careful about that line.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next hand I have raised is Vice Chair Beebe.
Thank you, Chair Thorner. Hey, just a quick question. Was item 20 the SALT grant item on tracking ag use? I was just curious what exactly that is and what the outcome or product is planned to be used for.
Well, yeah, so item 20 in the work plan is a grant that we are actually partnering up with Cheryl Landrum and the RCD of Greater San Diego. And the idea and the intent is to document ag trends, past and present, and then to ultimately take that information, like what is the temperature of ag in San Diego County now and perhaps a little bit going forward, and then perhaps a future grant can actually do some tangible actions on the topic with the idea of preserving and assisting agricultural uses. And right when I said preserving, I knew that triggers a reaction from some of our members that if we try to preserve through regulations, we somehow hurt. So I immediately wanted to acknowledge, that wording choice on my end is intended to be cooperative and not regulatory.
Keen, will that work be confined to the Greater San Diego RCD, or will it be countywide?
Let's. Cheryl had her hand up, and Cheryl will. The RCD will be the project manager on it. We are the grant holder. We hold the money, and then RCD will actually be organizing the troops.
Right, and basically, SALC stands for Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation, is by identifying the agricultural lands and their land uses within San Diego County. Our objective basically is to have that planning document be able to capture the history of our ag production in San Diego County, show the financial impact that it generates and the importance of it. But taking that then to be able to look for other grants through this program to purchase ag lands and keep them out of development.
So Cheryl, as you probably know, my service area, and I think Jack's as well, is in the Mission RCD. Will you be doing the study in the Mission RCD service area as well?
Yes, all of the county will be involved. Okay. The County of San Diego is a partner.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we're the administrative end of it, but the county, SANDAG, the Farm Bureau, and LAFCO are all primary partners on this grant.
And just to add in, Tom, LAFCO has a boundary too, and it is countywide.
Yeah, okay. I just, when you said it was the RCD Greater San Diego, I'm like, we just talked about service out of boundaries with RCD last month. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, here we go again.
Yeah. We're going to talk about it in a little bit too.
Oh, okay, good.
Do I have any other committee members that would like to provide feedback at this time on this item? Okay, just before my comment before we move off, 30 projects, very aggressive projects, a significant workload with only a 1.3% increase in budget. I want to acknowledge the efforts of Keene and the LAFCO staff to keep it limited, and very much appreciate as an agency that pays LAFCO dues, the efforts to keep costs controlled. So I do want to say thank you to LAFCO staff for that. Obviously, if anyone has additional comments, this is going in May, I believe, as Keene said, so you can provide comments before that. With that, I think we are ready to move on to item 5B. And I do realize that we have 4 current registered speakers. What I'd like to do is take the staff report first, then move on to the registered speakers. And if we receive any more, we can check in with Erica to see if we have any more, and then open it up for a discussion amongst the members. So with that, let's move on to the staff report. And I understand our executive officer is going to kick us off on that.
Yes, I'm going to be pinch hitting for Linda, who's a bit under the weather, and then Robert and Alex will help certainly with the questions in feedback portion of this item. But what is before the committee is a couple things. The anchor of the item is we're bringing back now the final version of our municipal service review on resource conservation districts, a service review that has been finalized and accepted by the commission back at their February meeting. You will recall, committee, for those members who were in attendance at the December 18th meeting, we brought this to you in a draft form. We had a pretty robust discussion about some of the topics and recommendations in the document. And you actually went forward and with the blessing of the committee, the chair proceeded to create a working group to follow up on one particular recommendation that was making its way into the from the draft into the final report. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. And I think we're going to hear from the committee on their task in following up with this one particular item. But what you see as attachment 1 is basically a summary of all of the key issues that have been captured in this service review. And the context being there are 3 resource conservation districts in San Diego County. The largest in terms of both boundary and budget is Greater San Diego. And then there's 2 resource conservation districts up in North County, albeit different parts of North County. You have Mission, the Fallbrook, Bonsall area, and then you have Upper San Luis Rey, Palma Valley for the most part. As we talked about at some length in December, not only was this a learning experience for LAFCO, because this was the first municipal service review that we had prepared on RCDs since the statute had come up for us, the statute being LAFCO's prepare these documents on a somewhat regular basis. But it also certainly proved to be a learning experience for our 3 RCDs. And in that learning experience on both ends, there were some issues, and there are some issues that we have flagged requiring some follow-up work. One of the big issues, and Tom made reference to this in 5A committee, is there is a need, an immediate need to sync up these district services with their boundaries. And unlike most of you, water, fire, sewer providers, RCDs are primarily funded through grants. And those grants sometimes lure the agencies outside of their boundaries, and understandably so, they in providing certain services. That said, LAFCO's mission, of course, is to make boundaries matter. And so one of the key recommendations of this document that the commission has proceeded to endorse and is actually part of our working plan is to spend some time with the 3 agencies, and in particular Greater San Diego and Mission, in figuring out how to sync up their services and their boundaries. In some cases, maybe it does make sense that there are some authorized outside service relationships that continue. That said, just like I made the comment that boundaries need to matter, outside service agreements need to matter and need to be formalized through either a LAFCO approval process, or there needs to be agreements in place between the affected agencies, MOUs, what have you. This is going to be a big lift, and in particular in making sense of Mission's resource conservation district services that I would offer up as a somewhat now informed outside party has become largely dependent on outside service arrangements and the grant monies that come with it. So we are sensitive to this issue that syncing up missions boundaries or services with their boundaries economically might not be, well, certainly it's not easy, and it might not prove solvent for that district. So this is going to be a big topic for us going forward. Another topic that is in our work plan that draws from this document is recognizing that the Principal Act for the RCDs, all 3 RCDs operate under, it's not an easy read. It was written, at a time when the vernacular of legislation was a bit loose. And while that may serve a benefit in the flexibility, it manifests itself in some questions and ambiguities about how districts are to operate in this modern era. So we are going to be working with a number of stakeholders in proposing a rewrite of the RCD law itself. And then third and final, and now I'm getting towards where the working group is going to pick up on this item. In the course of addressing Upper San Luis Rey RCD, a question began to circulate for us about whether or not it's the district's participation in the groundwater sustainable agency activities up in Palma Valley, the Palma Valley Subbasin GSA, whether or not the underlining service power or class of groundwater management was something that should have gone through a formal approval process under LAFCO law, or did it predate and is it already effectually authorized for various reasons? We started to address that topic in the transition of a draft to final report. As we got to the commission in the final report, we made it very clear that we needed to isolate the question, take it out of the MSR and prepare an addendum, specifically to dive into this fundamental LAFCO task that we have for all of you, by the way. So look forward to that as we get to your MSRs, which is to establish and regulate each district's service functions and classes, right? And the idea is what is an inactive or latent service power or class then gets memorialized, and if should you ever want to activate it at your special district, well, then there's a whole process under state law to come to LAFCO to potentially approve it. And likewise, should you have an active service power class that you want to get out of, well, the state has made it clear by recent legislation, you just can't stop the service. You got to actually get LAFCO approval to divest it before doing so. That is the context to the addendum that the commission told staff to prepare, as well as this committee tasked the working group to help inform, which is what is this district, Upper San Luis Rey's authority and authorization, and those are two different things, right? You have the authority under your Principal Act to provide, in some cases, a range of services. However, you still need to get the authorization from LAFCO. The question that we are working on and that the committee has a recommendation the working group has a recommendation for the full committee to digest is this question of where is Upper San Luis Rey's powers and authorization when it comes to groundwater? Is it already a done deal? Are no more approvals needed? Or in fact, do they need to come to LAFCO if they want to proceed and continue to be a groundwater management provider? That's the question of the addendum. I had hoped to bring the committee a draft addendum outlining our thoughts, but I decided you'd much rather just hear us talk a little bit about it than read it. And that gives us some flexibility in kind of finalizing our thoughts before we go to the commission on April 5th but you do have a committee recommendation and thoughts on this. And so knowing that we have some people who would like to speak on the topic, Chair Thorner, I'm going to defer to you, Jack, and Paul, if you'd like to take the reins a bit and go over your recommendation, which we have provided as attachment two to your staff report. And again, we're here to then go a little further into our thinking about the addendum topic with the help of Alex and Robert. But this is for discussion and ultimately to help us finalize our recommendation that we will take to our commission on April 5th. So Chair Thorner, I pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to ask Mr. Beebe and Mr. Bushy if they'd like to provide comment on our recommendation, which I believe is included in your packet. The email is included in the packet. Do either of you want to speak to that?
I'll defer to you, Kim, but if,
Okay.
Harry, I'll speak. You wrote the note here, and I thought you summed it up perfectly.
Okay, Mr. Beebe?
Yeah, same comment. I think.
Okay. You'll defer. Okay.
Kind of consensus, and you summarized it very well.
Okay. All right, so we did have multiple meetings, the first with LAFCO council and staff, and then we did narrow it down to this one question, and the question was whether or not the Upper San Luis Rey RCD was providing water management functions prior to 2000. And we did get documentation that showed they were providing those water management functions back to at least the early 1990s. They provided contracts with the National Resource Conservation District. And what we determined was water quality protection, water conservation, watershed education were all water management functions that had been and continue to be offered by the Upper San Luis Rey RCD. And so we felt that they had been practicing water management via these functions since before 2000, and thus predate and in our minds was authorized. Again, and this will probably not be a surprise to this committee, we keep looking at that Rule 4.4, and I'm very glad that it is due for update this year in the work plan, because when you look at 4.4, groundwater management, water distribution aren't actually listed as functions. You have underwater, it's retail, wholesale, replenishment, and injection are all listed. And so our second recommendation to Keene is that we definitely update that rule to reflect current industry terms and functions. And so that was essentially the recommendation to Keene of the work group, and that we're bringing it back for a discussion with you all today. I think with that, is there any more staff presentation, or should I go to the public speakers?
Well, actually, Chair, so what I'd like to do is check in with Alex and see if, Alex, you had any observations. I'm certainly ready, also, Alex, depending on how you want to sync up any comments on your end, to outline the kind of the 3 or 4 criteria steps we have in our mind in addressing this question. But let me check in with Alex. Any comments on your end?
Yeah, thank you, King. So I think the approach that staff was thinking about is slightly different. Instead of recognizing that the existing, the services that were provided constitute groundwater management, I think staff was proposing, really outlining that the groundwater, I have it here, water conservation isn't so much groundwater management as it is maybe watershed management. And watershed management is something that's expressly allowed under the Principal Act of the Resource Conservation District. I guess we would probably outline a couple of functions that they do perform that doesn't technically qualify as groundwater management, but may serve that purpose. Like I said, watershed management is within their Principal Act. What they do in addition is, I believe they have They have a water planning service that they provide. There's educational services they provide. I think maybe Robert, if you want to chime in, I know you have this pretty well summed up.
Go ahead, Robert.
Mr. Barry.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. You know, staff has had a lot of discussions about this in relation to SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. That's a new law that was passed, and it creates a new authority over groundwater extraction that did not exist. And that's limited only then to basins identified by the state in a critical overdraft circumstance. So there's a public good behind this GSA, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, being formed. And I think that that's in line with the water conservation function of RCDs. And so there's not a question necessarily of the eligibility of the RCD to be a part of the GSA. I don't think that that's really in question at all. What we're trying to say is that the SGMA, the new law, provides for expanded activities that exceed the scope of what the RCD has provided previously. And to fully capture all of the proposed activities by the GSA, we think that it would be prudent to establish a new classification of service for the RCD, specifically designated towards sustainable groundwater management under SGMA, that would cover both surface waters and groundwaters, as opposed specifically to groundwater management, which doesn't necessarily cover those other aspects. As Alex mentioned, watershed management, watershed includes surface and groundwaters, as well as a number of other criteria that I think would benefit an agency empowered to be a GSA. So what we're saying is that the RCD is in itself eligible to be part of the GSA, that water conservation is an authorized function of the district. However, the new expanded capacities or capabilities of a groundwater sustainability agency should be codified in a new classification of service so that there isn't any question over the ability of the RCD to participate fully within the GSA. Now, a key distinction in section 56425, when LAFCO is establishing or updating spheres, we are required, it's a shall, the commission shall establish the location, nature, and extent of those services. So what we've done is to identify the services previously provided by the district, which establishes somewhat of a grandfather clause under CKH to continue to provide those services, and then also to recognize the services currently being provided. So our responsibility is to make sure that those services are allowed under the Principal Act, which all of them are, and that the location, nature, and extent of those services is consistent with the local LAFCO rules. Each LAFCO in the state, one in each county, is entitled to create its own rules for implementation of CKH based on local conditions and circumstances. This is a new circumstance, and while we fully support the GSA and its goals, we think that to make this clear and very straightforward as we move through further iterations of sphere reviews and service reviews, that the classification of service be consistent with what the proposed services of the GSA is going to be. So when we establish the nature, extent, and location of services, it's on the services being provided. The GSA is not fully activated and is still in the formative stage, with an end date, to my understanding, of formation fully by the end of this year. So there is adequate time for the district to provide a request to activate the service. However, it's incumbent on the commission to determine whether or not a new classification is necessary. And so what we're trying to do is to get feedback over the necessity of this, because if the commission determines that their water conservation function fully covers these new services provided under SGMA, then we move forward and we just establish that this is a service that's been approved by the commission and authorized. However, if the commission agrees that the new scope of services under the GSA requires a new classification of services to cover those activities, and that watershed management would adequately cover those future services, then that activation should be contingent when those services are activated. So once the GSA is established, that service classification should be activated contingent with that acting. Now, again, that doesn't speak to the eligibility of the GSA. That is a determination by the state, and we're not questioning that. But there is a legitimate question over the nature of the classes of services adequately spelling out the nature and the location and extent of the activities that the district will be providing as a GSA. And so that's really the direction that we're looking for. Again, the nature and the extent of these services exceed their current services. So what we want to do is to codify their ability as a GSA to move forward effectively without any question that they're fully authorized and entitled as a member of the GSA.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Berry. Can I ask one point of clarification? You're saying the Resource Conservation District would be eligible under the water conservation function, and you'd have a new class of service. Would any retail water agency, if this logic applied to other agencies, would every retail water agency in San Diego County that desired to enter into a GSA, like my agency that's doing a brackish project, would we then need to come to LAFCO and request this new class of service if we hadn't previously participated in a GSA?
No, because the SIGMA specifically delineates the eligibility for member agencies as either having land use authority, water supply authority, or water management. And so every water district that I'm aware of has water supply authority and authorization, other than some paper MWDs like San Luis Rey. And so the critical distinction is that the water agencies are eligible not only under SIGMA, but also under the groundwater management provisions of the Public Resources Code in section 2.75, which follows right after SIGMA in 2.74. However, the local agencies under groundwater management are limited specifically to water service providers. SIGMA expands that eligibility to land use authorities and to water management agencies. So the question of water districts is not a question. The RCD, unless it has an authorized classification covering water management specifically, well, the SIGMA question then has to be connected. And so what we're saying is a new class of service would connect those two dots and establish that as a class of service locally, specifically under SIGMA.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call in Vice Chair Beebe, and then I believe we'll go to the public comment, and then we can come back to committee for discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just had a clarification too, because I got a little confused. So, you know, if our assessment was essentially they're providing water management functions based on the activities they've been providing, and that, you know, SIGMA allows an agency that does water management to be a GSA, it sounded like that logic held, but you felt there was a need to define groundwater management as a new class of services. And I think going along with what Kim said, does that then mean any agency practicing groundwater management under their water, you know, distribution services would need to go to activate that service within LAFCO? And just thinking, this sounds like kind of the second part of our recommendation, which is, you know, doing it as part of updating Rule 4 so that we don't get in situations where we're now creating new services that create, you know, other confusion with other agencies. So that I was just a little confused on how that would play out.
Understood. The real issue with this is that we have water conservation established as a function under resource conservation. But the services that the RCD was planning previously were based on planning and education outreach. And so that in itself, I think, is somewhat specious to connect that as water management. And so the SIGMA is explicit. It's water supply, water management, land use. That's it. So what we're saying is that the previously provided services of the RCD don't necessarily cover the scope of the management activities of the GSA. So we're not saying this has an application towards other functions like wastewater, fire, et cetera. What we're saying is that under the resource conservation function and water conservation specifically, that SIGMA is a new law with new authority and new activities that exceed planning and education. And so it actually regulates groundwater extraction and deals with surface water storage as well as groundwater. So what we're saying is that to adequately cover this, a new classification is appropriate in response to a new law and new activities. However, it is simply a classification of service under an existing function specifically related to those activities. A water agency does not have those questions. They already have water supply authorization and or water management in relation to that. There's a, wastewater is also considered the same way, which I think is a lot closer to water management than watershed planning or education. So again, a new class of service would only be relative to whoever has resource conservation activities and water conservation functions. If they want to become a GSA and that is limited to only those types of activities, that might be a question, but that wouldn't be applied to a water district or presumably a wastewater district.
Thank you. All right, well, you know what? I do have two hands up. I'm going to go Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Bushy.
Oh, okay, I thought we were going to go after the public comments, but I guess following up on what Robert said, I think that he was correct that eligibility under Sigma is really not a question for LAFCO. That eligibility question's handled at the state level. But, when the differentiation that Robert made between, some of the conservation programs and there was a lot of documents in, I think it was the December LAFCO package that the RCD had provided about different grants to do education and outreach and things like that. And the functions within water management or the groundwater management under the Sigma are different than those things. And so I think that while one of the things that one would require when you're going to activate a function is to have a plan for service, because the things you're going to do as part of a GSA and the fees you're going to charge, the wellhead monitoring, all the sorts of things you're going to be doing is that normally I would suggest that it'd be appropriate to have them provide a plan for service and apply to have LAFCO activate that service and not really tackle the question of whether it's eligible for GSA, because that's up to the state. And I think that also we went through a process in this about a year ago regarding Leucadia's situation with recycled water and the challenges there. And I think these are kind of different things in that Leucadia, that had been for many, many years providing the exact service, right? They were doing that function. They had a treatment plant. They were providing and distributing that water to the golf course. And thus the grandfather clause seemed a little more appropriate. In this situation, while there were, water management type activities that Robert described, they aren't the same activities that were required under the GSA and the activities that will be done under Sigma. And so those two comparisons aren't quite right to grandfather. Yeah, I was doing something that was kind of like what I'm going to do in the future, so I'm grandfather. I think that it'd be appropriate if LAFCO was to tackle this topic, that a plan for service be provided and then it be considered in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. All right, we'll do Mr. Bushy. You had your hand up and then we'll go to public comment.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I think Robert said I'm not sure if I got more confused, but I guess the would be whether the GSA itself would have to be authorized through LAFCO. Because the way we looked at this, the main point we were looking at and all the feedback getting from the various parties that were involved was the eligibility requirement. And we felt, Tom, that the state the State Water Resources Control Board had authorized them to participate primarily at this point to do the planning function, which is to develop the groundwater plan. But I think we all agreed, and Kim and Jack, you can chime in, that if Upper San Luis Rey, the RCD, started to provide extracting water, replenishing water, or installing any sort of pipes, that would be different than water management. And water management, we felt, made them eligible, but if they started doing anything different than they're doing now, that in terms of delivering water in any way, shape, or form, that they would need LAFCO approval to do that. But I'm just, as we talk about this, I'm wondering whether the GSA itself would have these powers, or is it the individual agencies that make up the GSA that would have the various powers? And I don't see it as anything different. I don't think if the GSA started to manage groundwater actively, I don't think the Upper San Luis Rey RCD would automatically authorized to start, doing their own wells or delivering water or doing any sort of function like that. So Kim or Jack, do you agree with that assessment? That's how I understood it.
Yeah, I think I wrote that in the end of the summary, was that mere participation in the GSA was different in our mind than actually extracting, moving, taking water, building infrastructure under the water supply function. We thought water management, water supply, two very different things. All right, with Jack, or Mr. Beebe, you in agreement?
Yeah, I agree. I think we saw, I think it's in some ways there seems to be a bit of overplaying what a GSA is. So GSA is similar to watershed management. It's just now also including management of the water under the ground, but they are not actually physically doing any water distribution or infrastructure. If they did, then they would need to do, an additional power.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with that, I do have 4 speakers I'll call in, and then after that, I'll check in with Erica to see if we have any additional requests to speak. I would like to start with Amy Reed, the General Manager of Uwima Municipal Water District.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I first just wanted to clarify with Robert, you keep referring to the fact that the RCD only does water planning and water education, but the work group clearly established that they do many more functions than just water planning and water education, and that they do water management functions. So I just want to clarify that, you understand that they don't just do water planning and water education, and that the functions that they do makes them eligible to do water, under their water conservation, water management function. But I really do think that this group as a whole has done a great job addressing the situation. I appreciate all their hard work. I appreciate Ms. Thorner, Mr. Beebe, and Mr. Bushy's hard work on their review of the information and their recommendation. And we want to, work with LAFCO in whatever possible manner that we can to make sure that they understand all the different aspects of the RCD's activities that they do, and help them understand so their addendum can be very thorough and thought out. And we will, we will do whatever we can to help work through this process and not be a hindrance to it. So I just look forward to working with LAFCO in the future to do that.
Thank you very much for those comments. So I have, and I apologize if I mispronounce, Andy Lytle, next speaker, followed by Mr. Steve Anderson.
Yes, you got it. You pronounced it exactly correctly. Thank you. My name is Andy Lytle. I'm the president of the Upper San Luis Rey Resource Conservation District. So thank you, Keen and Robert, staff, for going through this process. Thank you to this committee for listening to us. Thank you for letting me listen in as you guys work through these issues. And thank you to the working group, Ms. Thorner and Mr. Bushy and Mr. Beebe. Thanks for going above and beyond, going to the extra effort to look into this. I think the Ms. Thorner, your email here sums up my opinion that, and so I think you guys nailed it, what you have been talking about. I think the definition that Robert has mentioned several times, that the definition of a local agency under SGMA is very, very basic. A local agency is a public agency that has water supply, water management, or land use responsibilities. So I think they kept it broad on purpose. So I would be concerned if we tried to make it too specific. I think there's a reason they kept it broad, so that several different types of agencies could be involved in GSAs. So, and I think it's clear that as shown in the MSR, that the Upper San Luis Rey RCD has water conservation as an active power. And I think it's a very very clear connection between water conservation and water management. So I think it's easy to fit in the definition for the RCD of under Sigma. The State Water Board has approved the Upper San Luis Rey RCD as a member of the GSA. We've been, this GSA was formed back in 2017, and the Upper San Luis Rey was one of the original members of that. So this GSA has been operating for years, and the stage we're in right now is the plan is being developed, and the plan is due by the beginning. The process we're in now, the GSA has been functioning and operating for several years now. So as the committee and the commission and staff work through all these issues, I'm, like Amy said, I'm ready and willing to work with LAFCO as if there's any need to clarify anything. I can respect that. I understand that. But I guess my main feeling is that water conservation is clearly water management, and that's the definition of a local agency under Sigma is very broad on purpose, so that different water agencies can be involved, RCDs can be involved, and that the community can come together, and that it's not so hyper focused on a very specific group of agencies that can be involved. We need the whole community to be involved out here, and I think that's why the definition is so broad. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those remarks. I have Mr. Steve Anderson followed by Mr. Jeremy Youngrice.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission or the committee. My name is Steve Anderson. I am the attorney for the Palma Valley Community Services District, which is one of the members of the GSA that, as Mr. Lytle just described, has been in existence and operating for several years now. We very much appreciate the recognition by staff of the eligibility of the Upper San Luis Rey RCD to be a GSA and to participate in the GSA. I think it's important to recognize what happened back in 2015. The legislature recognized there was a really desperate situation, particularly in the Central Valley, regarding groundwater and dropping groundwater elevations. And so they cast a broad net on purpose to have all sorts of agencies that touched on water issues be eligible to be groundwater sustainability agencies, because the problem was so grand and there was no time to waste. And so there's a reason that the RCD and a number of other agencies are eligible to perform this function, is because the legislature didn't want this responsibility to slip through the cracks in areas where maybe they didn't have every kind of agency out there. So I think that was purposely done, and we appreciate staff's recognition of that. We also appreciate the really hard work of your working group, and we concur with the decisions and discussions that are had, particularly in this one pager that's and the explanation that's in the board packet. And beyond that, I think it is worth reemphasizing, although the last two speakers also said it, that at this stage, the focus is on the planning aspect of Sigma, which is preparing the groundwater sustainability plan that's due by January 31st of 2022. That's where we are. We're looking at planning. And the good news about Sigma is that it gives 20 years to implement projects in order to reach sustainability no later than 20 years, 2042 or so. And so there was this reference by the staff to, all these abilities of the GSA to regulate extractions and all those things. And obviously that's a decision for the GSA to make, but the sense I get is that's not something that's going to be a threshold that will be crossed anytime soon, not in the near future, not in the next 5, 10, or 15 years. And so I think thinking about or worrying about, gee, the RCD might go out and start doing things that are beyond the scope. I think there's plenty of time to deal with that. I don't think there's a deadline by the end of this year. Then we better figure this out, because again, right now, this is all about planning, all about adopting a plan to move forward and take 20 years or more to implement it. And so I'm not sure there's a real need to press on the gas pedal. Obviously, I defer to LAFCO on that and the way you feel about it. But I think we're moving with all deliberate speed on the planning, and we welcome the RCD's participation and their representation of all the farmers in the area that really aren't represented by others. And Obviously, I think it's in the best interest of all of us, and I think we're avoiding that of having the state come in and sort of intervene to take over the basin when really it's a function the legislature wanted the local agencies to undertake. So again, thank you for your efforts and your time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for those remarks. I have Mr. Jeremy Youngrise next.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Thorner. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just a couple of thoughts. I'm general counsel for UEMA. I guess folks probably know that by now. I guess overall, I want to thank the task force, subcommittee, whatever you guys are calling yourselves, for having taken the time to really dove into this issue. I know you're all really busy, so thank you for doing that. I would ask the larger advisory committee to go ahead and adopt what the recommendations of the subcommittee are. They spent the time. They spent a lot of time with legal counsel going over, what are the legal requirements and have they been met? And their determination was, Sigma requires, or Sigma provides eligibility for an agency, a local agency, to provide groundwater management if they have land use, water management, or water supply responsibilities. And the determination of the task force, after having spent a great deal of time on it, was that indeed the RCD, the Upper San Luis Rey RCD, does in fact exercise water management functions. And it's the only conclusion they could have reached. If folks want to take a look at the January 29th letter to LAFCO supplied by the GSA, which, as Mr. Anderson and others have pointed out, has been around since 2017. So this is not new, and it's not, as Mr. Berry indicated, something that's still cooking. It's a fully formed legal entity that's been around since 2017. But in the January 29th letter, we go through in pretty significant detail projects that are not just planning, but actual real in-the-ground projects that took place going back to the 1980s, where the RCD was actually working with the NRCS, the National Conservation Service, to do flood control projects. They were putting in check dams. They were preventing flooding. They had extensive water management activities. And to say that they're not exercising those it's not really supported by. If anyone reads the January 29th letter, they can only leave with one conclusion, that this is an agency that does water management. And so to say that they don't, I'm not sure where that's coming from. So I would ask, along with adopting the recommendations, I just point out that there are two letters from the tribes, the Indian Water Authority, who kind of got this whole issue teed up. Their recommendation is that LAFCO should take no further action. They've said that twice now. And so you've got, although I will echo that of Ms. Ray and Mr. Lytle, that LAFCO, we want to be a solution with LAFCO, and we want to work with LAFCO, but we also have a very hard deadline coming up in January of 2022 where we have to have that GSP done. And going through a process that could prevent us from getting that GSP done means one thing. It means the state takes over the basin, and nobody wants that. And so except the tribes have indicated that's their goal. And so to the extent that, to the extent that anything that LAFCO does right now could prevent us from finishing that GSP on time, I'd really ask you to be really cautious. A couple other points, and I'll be done. At this point, the State Water Board, who the tribes and others have indicated, is the one who, kind of makes the determinations about who under Sigma can manage groundwater. They've already opined that RCDs, and there's 10 of them around the state, are authorized to act as GSAs. And in some basins, the RCD is the lead. They're the only one doing it. It's not just doing it through a joint powers authority. So there's extensive practice there already occurring. And so this, I don't know why San Diego LAFCO is different, perhaps, or why these other RCDs are different than this RCD. It would seem like they have the authority, and I'd ask the committee to just follow what the recommendation of which I think is the only real answer. One other thing that was mentioned was section 2.75 of the Public Resources Code. I believe that's a reference to AB 3030. That preceded Sigma, which kind of I shouldn't say kind of, did supplant the AB 3030 program, which was entirely voluntary and largely ineffective. And so the legislature wanted, as Mr. Anderson noted, to cast a broad net. I know, because I was involved in drafting section 10723 of the Water Code, which is what was the eligibility. I worked with Tina Cannon-Leahy and Dennis O'Connor on drafting that language, and the intent was very clearly with the understanding that, hey, we've got to make it so local agencies can manage the groundwater here, or we're going to have large areas that are going to remain unmanaged. And so with that, I would just again emphasize for the committee, please, the only real logical legal conclusion and the one that leads to the best result, sustainable groundwater management, is to adopt the recommendations of the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. With that, I'd like to check in with Erica to see if you've received any public comment via email while we've been discussing this item.
So far, no public comments.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. I appreciate all the speakers today and the staff report. So now I'd like to open it up for feedback, because that is what we are here today to do, is discuss the work group recommendation, but that is feedback to the executive officer. Do I have any committee members that would like to provide feedback? Okay.
I would.
Thank you, Mr. Scalzetti.
I would just like to thank the subcommittee for putting in the hard work. I know it's taskful, and you guys got enough things going on and your other jobs and stuff to put forth the effort to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And if that, with that being said, I think I'd like to move approval for staff's recommendation if it's appropriate.
Okay, I don't know that there is a staff recommendation, I think, and I'm going to go back to Keen on this. Mr. Simons, you're formulating your staff recommendation right now. Is that correct?
Correct. And so the question of the day is this working groups outlining and recommendation reflect the voice of the entire committee, and there can be an and there, are there other items that you would like LAFCO to take into account before we complete the pen to paper with the addendum process?
Okay, thank you for that.
So,
and wait, before I go, I'm sorry, Mr. Scalzetti, go ahead.
So we're not going to take the subcommittee's recommendation, or they haven't finished all the way with it, or I mean, sounds pretty much like we are pretty going that way.
The work group is complete. And its recommendation is what is in the email. And so I think feedback on the work group's recommendation is what we're seeking.
Okay.
Or concurrence, Joel.
Or concurrence. Yes.
Yeah, concurrence. I think that, like I said, I think they put in the time. They kind of figured out what the best analogy is for this, some kind of complex analogy of what should be happening, and I think doing the final decisions on upgrading the work or the policies that you're going to re-update this year is appropriate. So that I think that a lot of it doesn't have to be changed until we change some of those updates to our policies.
Okay, thank you for
that. And that's going to be later this year.
It is in the work plan for this year, yes, Mr. Simon.
Yeah, it was actually in this year's work plan. We punted it, and it's something that, geez, every time we do an MSR, a new question comes up. So we'll definitely talk about it. Whether we complete it, I'm not sure. I do see, Chair, that maybe we have a public comment.
Yes, can we go back to Erica? Do we have a public comment?
We do. So give me just 1 second. Okay, so we received a public comment for item 5B from Heather Conklin of the Mission Resource Conservation District. And her comment is, thank you to the committee for the commission discussion today and for giving consideration to my comment. My comment pertains to the San Diego LAFCO grant in partnership with GSD SRCD to collect data on agricultural trends throughout the county. More specifically, I would like to know how this data on agricultural trends will be used. Will this data be used in SD LAFCO's future analysis to determine boundaries for RCDs? Assuming that the data on agricultural trends will be used to inform SD LAFCO's future decisions, it seems that all impacted agriculturally focused agencies should have been initially invited to participate in these data collection efforts, given the specific areas of expertise for each agency. MRCD has specific knowledge and a deeper understanding of agricultural trends and needs, as MRCD's district is largely agricultural. Thank you again for your clarification on this issue and consideration. I'm happy to further discuss how MRCD might assist in data collection and planning to continue supporting agriculture in our region. I have provided my contact information for staff for your convenience. And that's the end of her comment, and I'll have this posted on our website shortly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so can we go back to now the question at hand, the committee's consensus support or lack of support for the work group findings? Mr. Lau?
Yeah, I want to thank the work group's hard work on this particular issue. I know it's complex and obviously with the GSA, I do agree. I do have some experience working with the San Diego GSA group. I think the original legislation intends to be broad to allow local control of the groundwater basin. I think the work group's recommendation makes a lot of sense. I would move to concur with that recommendation to the staff.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lau and Mr. Scalzetti made a similar comment. Do I have anyone else that would like to provide a comment on the work group recommendation?
Can I ask a question of the work group? This is Keen.
Absolutely.
So one of the and I do find all of this interesting, and as I think Robert was articulating, we have a lien that's going a certain way, but we're taking all of this in. And so one of the interesting comments that I think all three of the committee members articulated, and I'd be curious if the committee would want to weigh in on this, is the inference in the recommendation that right now, water being a member of the GSA at this point it constitutes a planning function, in that it would be different. And I wish my memory was better to quote, but I think one of the members said it would be different if there was actual facilities being constructed, if water was actually being conveyed. So my question then would be, should the groundwater agency, the GSA, go beyond, and I assume they will, go beyond the preparation of a plan, a GSP, and then ultimately start regulating groundwater and putting meters on groundwater spigots and invoicing water usage as SGMA allows? Would that then, in your collective minds, transition to being or require then a new service class that would need to come to LAFCO?
I'll state my understanding, and we did talk about this. We did distinguish water management functions of protecting water supply, conservation, water quality, being very different than water supply, extracting water, building physical pipes, selling water. And so we felt that if they planned on doing that in the future, that going to LAFCO would be required. But we felt that mere participation in a GSA, they checked that box under the water management functions that they had been doing. Mr. Beebe and Mr. Bushy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it clearly, Keen. I think the thing to remember is the GSA may never be more than a plan, right? So the GSA may form, it may develop the plan, then it may just keep track of this and identify for each member, like, all right, here's your allocation. It's up to you to monitor it and you report to us. So the GSA could be somewhat more of like a water master function than an actual, water agency that you're describing, where they actually own anything. They may not own any infrastructure, but yeah, I agree. If they begin to own and operate infrastructure, that is a different exercise. And I think that requires coming to LAFCO. If they're going to start to own things, issue bills, collect money for water use, that I think takes some action at LAFCO. But I'm not sure that it will ever happen. I think that's sort of, as I see it now, I think that's got to play out, and it would be premature for them to come to LAFCO for something they may never do.
And I concur. The short answer is yes, Keen, to your question. The second thing that I think we talked about was we need to update the rules to accurately reflect all the types of functions and services so that we can place it into whatever service that that they would petition for in the future, if that were to ever happen.
Which is hence why we tied it back to updating that rule 4.4, right? It seems like that keeps rearing its ugly head over and over again. Mr. Barry, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to interject quickly to clarify. There's two issues going on. The eligibility of the GSA is established under the water conservation function. And again, that's not a question. What we're simply saying is that the new services authorized by Sigma for a GSA exceeds the scope and exceeds the nature, location, of extent of the current services provided by the district. Therefore, a new classification that would codify those new activities and services through Sigma should be included in Rule 4.4 as available under resource conservation. But again, that doesn't speak to its correlation with water management as eligibility for the GSA. What we understand is that water conservation allows for the eligibility under Sigma as a GSA. And again, we're not talking about that. What we're really talking about is whether a new class of service to cover the expanded scope of what a GSA does is necessary for the RCD specifically. LAFCO does not regulate the GSA. That is a state-created entity under Sigma, just like LAFCO is a state-created entity under Cortese Knox Hertzberg. So the real question is do the existing service classifications under resource conservation adequately cover the scope of activities of a GSA, the nature and location and extent of those services offered to the entire GSA? And so what we're saying is a water district doesn't have that question. A sanitation district presumably doesn't have that question. And RCD does. And what we're saying is that the most appropriate way to codify these new responsibilities as a GSA is to just simply create a new service classification under Rule 4.4, which is expected to be a dynamic rule that the commission can modify in relation to new authorization, new services, which is exactly what Sigma is. So again, it's just to clarify the need for a new service classification so that we can codify the RCD's role as part of the GSA, not to regulate the GSA or their activities, but to anticipate the nature and extent of those activities per the RCD. So I hope that clarifies it, and but it's a critical distinction.
Okay. Fascinating subject, and obviously you're very well versed on it. I guess if Sigma authorizes new services, I think what we were finding in our work group was that Upper San Luis wasn't actually going to be exercising those new services until such time as they did any type of extraction fit, that we were saying that they were still only within the water management function. And maybe just a nuance, right? And this is all new, right? You have this new law that's creating all these complexities, hence all the discussion. So thank you for that clarification. Do I have anyone else who has comments? Any other committee member? Okay, so I got feedback from 5, the 3 work group members and 2 other, that they were supportive of the work group recommendation, but I haven't, don't have to hear from everybody, but if you'd like to provide information either now or subsequently to the executive officer, you can do so that way. Okay, all right, I got a couple of thumbs up. All right. I believe that then concludes the discussion on item 5B. I do want to thank Mr. Bushy, who continually emailed me, we need to get together, we need to meet, we need to get this done. So thank you for that, that extra effort keeping the work group online. I appreciate that. Okay, with that, I think we are ready to move on to item 5C, which is the current and pending proposals, which is included in your packet. Mr. Barry, are you briefing this one?
Yes, very briefly. Basically, the item on the agenda is just an overview on the current proposals that are active and currently being processed, either pre-commission scheduling or post-commission hearing approval and pending recordation and final filing. There's over 24 active proposals, varying from district annexations to city annexations, as well as the Fall Book Rainbow reorganizations with the County Water Authority and Eastern MWD. We have received 2 new proposals in the last month, both involving annexations to special districts initiated by petition. And in most of those cases, they're due to single-family residential development or an existing septic system that is in trouble and needing to be abandoned and connected to public wastewater service. So I can answer any questions about any of the active proposals. We are aware of several large development proposals that are pending local approvals and SEQA review. A lot of those are caught up in the overall greenhouse gas and climate action plan issues that's been affecting some of the larger county approved developments that we've been involved with. But we are anticipating and tracking those as involving LAFCO actions if they are approved locally and then submitted to LAFCO. But that concludes my presentation unless there are any questions.
Okay, do I have any questions, comments on this item? And any members? Okay. All right, with that, we are on to, we were worried we weren't going to have any time, but we are on to the LAFCO website review. I believe Mr. New is presenting on this item.
He is, and if you could reappear for us in committee. As you may recall, a few years ago, we spent some of our money on developing a new website. It is still somewhat a work in progress, although certainly the bones are there. Dew has done a very good job of getting it functional. What we wanted to do is do a check-in with all of you just to get on your radars as we start approaching doing a more formal update with our Granicus provider. If there's any things that as frequent users, and I assume all of you would be categorized as frequent users of the LAFCO website, or at least your staff, are there things that are on your mind that you'd like to see, whether it's something new or just reimagined or reoriented? So Dew, if you could just give the committee just a quick walkthrough. And Chair, this can be taken offline as you absorb it now. We're certainly interested in getting feedback now and then offline in the next few weeks. So Dew, take it away.
Good morning, committee members. Like as King said, we put this new website about 2 years ago, and we haven't done much enhancement since then. At the time, it was felt like it was a good functioning website, but I think at this time we have an opportunity in the coming year to possibly make some minor enhancements. So we're looking for feedbacks, ideas from you guys whenever possible. I think you can see my screen, and this is the full homepage. Highlights a lot of our announcements that I update daily if needed, any changes, a lot of our agendas, nominations possibilities, and we have our meeting agenda type, our videos, and some of the quick links at the bottom. We have started exploring into the social media, and we have a Twitter account, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So one of the things is we will plan to add those links onto our main homepage as the next enhancement. services. We try to keep it to the simple for the public to answer their quick questions. We have our forms and fees, and then we also have another general announcements webpage. Most of the people will go to our meetings tab and our current agenda webpage. So this is probably the one that gets used most by the public. So I change these frequently depending on when the next meeting is. For today, it was the advisory, so I would highlight this so that people can kind of quickly go to our agenda and our live stream if need be. And then under agencies, we have the breakdown of cities and districts. On the districts, we have the website, profile webpage, and then a static map that we may look into making it more interactive in the future as well. And under resources, we have policies and our various MSR studies, spheres, our work plan, current proposals, and then we also list some of our major proposals going on. And the Rainbow Fallbrook is obviously the biggest one. And then just some extras. And under about, we have our background and our advisory group here. Thank you everyone for their profile and oops.
Hey, Jack.
Oh, I guess it's internet. For your pictures and bio.
Now, do you have everyone's bio and picture up there?
We are missing Mr. Cox, but we have his bio. We're just missing a lovely pic. But I think everyone else, we have it covered. So thank you everyone for participating on that.
And then just for the benefit, as we wrap this up, do show the commissioners. We have had quite a bit of change on the commission.
Yes.
And so why don't we actually tell them who we report to?
So here's our current commissioner.
And the big takeaway here, for the first time in, I believe, over 30 years, Diane Jacob is not at LAFCO. So we are going through a rather seminal sea change in the way we look at the world.
And I believe you have an alternate position that is out for vacancy being filled right now, correct?
So our alternate special district member, Aaron Lump, resigned, I believe, effective March 1st. And so Tammy is doing the call of nominations, and presumably in the next month or so, we'll, assuming we get, I know we have at least one nomination. I don't know if we'll get more, but assuming we get 2 or more, we'll do the actual election of ballots sent out to all the districts.
Okay.
So thank you for going through that. And again, committee members, what we're looking for, if there's any immediate comments now, or certainly as you digest it, as you talk to your staff members, if there are things that you look for at the website that has always bothered you, you've been nice not to bring it to Due's attention, but it really has created an irritant. We can address that irritant, but we need to know about it. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I did have the opportunity to play around with it, and I found it very functional, easy to use, and I very much appreciate that when you click on the name of the agency, it takes you to the website of the agency. So I definitely appreciate that interactiveness of the website. Mr. Beebe, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just going to
Reiterate. I texted you. Is that okay?
that comment. I think Mark's talking to someone. I think you guys do a great job keeping it up to date. the information is relevant. A lot of us that have websites struggle with that and have old information, but I've used it a lot. And the information I'm looking for is almost always there and relevant. The one time I couldn't find something, it was actually user error and it was there. So I just want to, say, I think you guys have done a, really good job, having all the information on there and keeping it up to date.
Thank you. Okay, so great job on that. Thank you for the presentation. And please, everyone, take the opportunity and give some feedback on the website. With that, we are on to item 6, public comments, and would like to check back in with Erica to see if we did receive any other public comments by the end of the meeting.
Nope, no public comments.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for checking for us. All right, we do have a moment if any committee member has an announcement that they would like to make about their special district or anything. It's not, you don't have to, but if there are any comments, anything exciting happening at everyone's agency, can feel free to raise your hand and offer a comment on committee member announcements. None? Okay, I think COVID's kept it quiet, yes? All right. All right, so with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you all for the participation and the discussion today, and we will see you at the next quarterly meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.